do I mean by playing the changes? Here's some just bluesy sounding playing. And then here's me attempting to more clearly play the changes. The idea is to match your playing to the harmony so you can hear the chords in your soloing, which can create a stronger musical impression on the listener. And all it's going to be is some extensions to this usual blues scale fingering that you likely already know. We're just going to do 12-bar blues in the key of A, and there's loads of diagrams and tabs. My one jazz teacher had this thing about not letting us call this the blues scale, and he insisted that we call it the minor blues scale. And when we said, okay, so what is the blues scale? He said something to the effect of, there's no such thing as a blues scale. What he was really talking about was how the blues scale changes depending on the chord. One of the main skills we want to develop is to feel the changes of the 12-bar blues so that we always know what chord we're playing over. And let's start by analyzing the form of the 12-bar blues. Not surprisingly, it's 12 bars long, but what it really is 3 lines of 4 bars each. For a 12-bar blues in A, we have this progression, and this chord is in brackets because it's a common variation. And what we usually hear is some singing here and a little guitar moment here, and then the second line is sort of a repeat or variation of the first with another little guitar break, and then the third line is something different that sort of cleverly ties it all together. And then crucially there's this part, the turnaround. The turnaround is the biggest landmark in a 12-bar blues form, and it's the easiest landmark to identify. Structurally, it's like a punctuation between each AAB form stanza. And then let's talk a bit about the harmony. In stereotypical classical or jazz music, the overall key is major or minor, and so we usually find just the one dominant 7th chord built on scale degree 5, and it's used as the most tense and agitated sounding chord that needs to resolve back to the more stable 1 chord of the key. But in this kind of blues, all the chords are dominant 7, even the 1 chord. And notice how the first line is all 1 chord, and the second line is 2, and then the third line is the most busy, with 1 chord per bar. I love this next thing, because if you hear it isolated, it just sounds kind of creepy or something. But with the bass notes, it suddenly sounds weirdly awesome. And then it's really easy and fun to play. Now the reason this works is because it's the 3s and 7s of the chords. It just turns out to be like that with dominant chords, and the 7th of one leads to the 3rd of the next. And we can call these guide tones. Now, we're not going to get too hung up on the theory today, but the reason I'm showing you this is because it's an easy way to practice the form of the blues. In this section, we're going to look at some other notes that we can add to make our leads sound more strongly like the harmony of the chords. We'll start with the 1 chord, A7. This is our usual minor pentatonic box scale with the added blue note. The root of the scale is the root of the 1 chord, and it sounds like the most stable or settled note of the scale. The surprising thing is that the scale has a minor 3rd, but the chord has a major 3rd, and so on paper it seems like it should clash and not work. And it sort of does clash, but in a really funky or bluesy way, and we can call it a sharp 9. And so we'll add in our first note to the extended scale, which is this major 3rd or C sharp, or I often call it the happy note. The sharp 9 has a tendency to resolve up into the more stable sounding major third. But usually not the other way. So try my little prototype licks first, and then play around with them. It's a really common blues thing to give the sharp 9 a bit of a bend, maybe just a quarter step. And it works because we're sort of bending the dissonant sharp 9 up towards the sweeter major third. And now that we have the major third, this version of the blues scale has a complete dominant 7th arpeggio in it. And it's good to know where these notes are and how they behave. We talked about roots and thirds already. Then the arpeggio also has the perfect 5th, and it's sort of the second most stable or strong sounding note of the arpeggio. And then the last note is the minor 7 or flat 7, which basically has a bluesy sound, and it tends to go back up to the tonic over the 1 chord, but it is also cool to leave it hanging. Our original scale already had this flat 5 blue note, and so over the 1 chord it's quite dissonant, and so its function is usually as a passing note or a neighbor tone to the notes beside. This note kind of has a lot going on, and part of it is that just floating by itself, it's actually a little weak over this A7 chord. And the reason is that the chord has the C sharp, but the note D is a half step above, and so it's a little clunky. But then there's another thing about this note, which is that if you bend it a whole step, you get to the 5th. But if you only bend it a half step, we get up to the blue note, and then all these little shades of how far you bend sound good and are fun to play with. Now I think we often find these two notes sort of by trial and error. As always, if it sounds good, then it's a thing. And here we have the 9 and the 6 or 13. Many blues players talk about blending the major and minor pentatonic scales. And if we literally just add all the notes up of the 2 pentatonics and throw in the flat 5 blue note for good measure, we get the exact same scale we just arrived at. So this is our extended blues scale to use over the 1 chord. Now let's adapt the scale to better match the 4 chord. And we'll start by checking out the guide tones. And as we saw earlier, they move down 1 fret for D7. And so this F sharp is the major third or happy note of the D7 chord. So once we add in the major third happy note, then we can already find a complete D7 arpeggio in the scale. We can also add in some of the same kind of sharp 9 happy note licks for this chord. The original flat 5 blue note of the A minor blues scale functions as a flat 9 over this note, and so it sounds different, but we can treat it essentially the same as over the A7. Just use your ears to judge the result. This note, E, is the 9th over D7, and it sounds very colorful in a pleasant, not very dissonant way. The perfect 5th of the D7 chord is A, the root of the scale, and it's in the arpeggio and still sounds quite stable. And then the scale already has a perfect 4th in it. The flat 7 or minor 7 of the chord is the note C, and it sort of sounds like it wants to go back up to the root of the chord, or you can leave it hanging. And the note B from our A7 extensions will also work nicely over this chord because it's a major 6 or 13. For the 5 chord E7, we're still starting with the original scale. And if you remember, the guide tones go up a fret from A7 to E7. So we have the root of the chord, E, which sounds stable over this chord. And then we can add in the guide tones from earlier. The minor 7 is already in there, but we can add in this G sharp, which is the major 3rd or happy note of the E7 chord. And the G from the original scale functions as the sharp 9, and we can use it to do these same kind of licks. And the other missing note of the arpeggio is B. Now the C is a little weird because it's a sharp 5 or flat 13, which is a cool dissonant note. We have the 3 extended forms of the blues scale, and each is based on the underlying A minor blues scale. The real fun begins when we want to work on playing over the changing chords, and I'd recommend to start with something like this. You're ready to try playing through the whole 12-bar blues, probably starting really slow. There are probably lots of other better approaches to phrasing, but I just want to give you one helpful way to think about it as an example. The 12-bar blues already has this AAB phrase structure built in, and so my big idea is just to copy that phrase structure in your solo. Have fun with all of that, and here's the video that YouTube thinks you would want to watch next.